for purposes of the record, you can call your next witness. And he has just been sworn in by the bailiff, so you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. Dr. Eisenberg, would you state your full name for the record?
Yes, James R. Eisenberg. Do I need to speak to one of these mics?
You can pull them down so that they can kind of pick you up. That would be great. And if you scoot your chair up, that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Dr. Eisenberg, you stated your full name for the record, but could you state your address?
Yes, James Eisenberg. Address is 161 North State Street in Painesville, Ohio.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a psychologist.
And what is your education and your training?
I have a undergraduate degree from Washington and Jefferson College in Pennsylvania. And I have a master's degree and a PhD from the New School for Social Research in New York City in psychology.
And are you licensed in any states?
Yes, I am.
And which states?
I'm licensed in Ohio, and I have a provisional license in Indiana.
And how about any specialties that you may have?
I have one specialty, which is forensic psychology.
Doctor, can you explain to the jury what a forensic psychologist is?
Yes, a forensic psychologist is an individual who's, first of all, licensed as a psychologist, but in addition to that has training in the forensic area or the legal area. So the role of a forensic psychology is to assist the trier of fact in legal matters.
And are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
And how does one become board certified?
I'm board certified with the American Board of Forensic Psychology. The application process requires several years of experience working in the field under supervision. And then you take a written examination, you submit your practice samples of cases that you've worked on to an examining board. You then sit for a 3-hour oral examination, and following that, you may or may not become board certified.
And is that kind of the highest level then that you can achieve?
Yes.
Have you held any positions with the American Board of Forensic Psychology?
Yes, the particular board that I referred to, I actually was on the board for 8 years as a corresponding secretary for the board. And in addition to that, I still serve as a faculty member on the board, and that means that twice a year we go to Atlanta to sit on the oral examinations of candidates and applicants for the position.
And just to give the jury an idea, Doctor, how many psychologists in the country are board certified as forensic psychologists?
Ballpark is, I think, 375.
What were some of your most recent positions?
For 35 years, well, 33 years, I was the professor of psychology, director of the criminal justice program, and associate dean of social sciences at Lake Erie College in Painesville, Ohio. I retired there in 2012. In addition to that, for about 19 years, I served as the court psychologist for the Lake County Forensic Psychiatric Clinic, which serves the Lake County courts for matters of assessment of criminal defendants. And I have a private practice.
What professional organizations do you belong to, Doctor?
I currently belong to the American Psychological Association, the Ohio Psychological Association.
And have you testified with both the prosecution and the defense?
Yes, I have.
Can you estimate how many times for either side?
Recently, it's pretty well split between the two. I don't testify all that often, a handful of times a year, maybe.
May I approach, Your Honor? Doctor, I'm going to hand you what has been marked as Defendant's Exhibit Y. Can you tell the jury what that is?
This is my CV resume.
Okay, and is that your current CV?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I'm going to offer Dr. Eisenberg up as
Any objection? No objection. You will be designated as such.
Thank you. Now, Doctor, how did you get involved in this case?
There was a prior proceeding, which I was contacted last December and asked to prepare a report solely on the battered woman syndrome, which I did. And then following that proceeding, I was contacted by you sometime a couple months ago.
And why not?
Objection, Your Honor. Sustained.
Doctor, you did not interview Ms. McKernan, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you're going to educate us today on battered woman syndrome.
Hopefully, yes.
Okay. Can you please describe for the jury what the battered woman syndrome is?
Yeah, the battered woman syndrome is a term developed in the 1980s by a woman named Lenore Walker, who coined the term to describe the reactions that women have in abusive relationships. So the syndrome refers to a pattern of symptoms that develop when there is a domestic violent relationship, and the symptoms that occur in some but not all women in such situations are often described then as the battered woman syndrome.
What are some of the symptoms that you would typically see?
Well, the symptoms are the kinds of things that you would expect in a threatening situation: fear, submissiveness, anger, some sense of depression, a variety of other symptoms that can develop in response to an imminent or potential threat. I'm sorry.
Do all women have to have the same symptoms in order to qualify for the battered woman syndrome?
No, there isn't a specific set of symptoms that a particular woman, by the way, could also affect men, but that a particular woman would fit. We have a diagnostic manual of mental disorders that we use to diagnose individuals, and the battered woman syndrome is, in fact, not one of those diagnoses.
And then have you in the battered woman syndrome?
Approximately 25 to 30.
Okay. And of those 25 to 30 women that you had diagnosed, did they all have the same background?
No.
Did they all have the same education level?
No.
Okay. Is there anything important about having a certain education level or socioeconomic status to fit the battered woman syndrome?
My response is that it's non-discriminatory. The battered woman syndrome doesn't discriminate against age or sex or whether you're gay or straight or black or white or economic standings. I've evaluated individuals from high professional positions to folks that are practically homeless.
What kind of things do you look for when evaluating a woman for battered woman syndrome?
Well, I look for a couple of things. Number one, I want to know the history of the relationship with her significant other. I want to know whether or not there is an established pattern of abuse by that significant other, and as much as possible to document that. I want to know how often that occurred and in what circumstances that occurred, what the threat level was. It may be a bad analogy, but there's certainly a difference between being, bit by a pug versus being bit by a German Shepherd. So the level of violence, I think, is important as well. And then how does a woman respond to that violence? What are her options, and what does she do to deal with that, or does she do nothing, as is often the case?
And can you actually explain for us what the cycle is in a battered woman syndrome?
Yes, traditionally when the syndrome was developed in the 80s, the research supported at that time a 3-cycle level of violence associated with battered women. There's what we call the tension building stage. It could occur at any time, even before marriage. It doesn't have to be a marriage. So the tension building stage is when the tension in the relationship begins to grow. There's the actual battering stage, that would be number 2, in which there is an act of psychological or physical or sexual violence. It doesn't have to be physical. And then there's the stage of contrition, in which, following this, there's apologies, there's remorse, and for those in the field of psychology, we see that as a stronger reinforcing part of that cycle, because it reinforces that the woman should stay in the relationship. Things will get better.
Can you explain the difference between the psychological abuse and the physical abuse these women may suffer?
Well, the research shows that there's no difference in terms of the threat, in terms of how a woman responds to whether it be physical or psychological. As I indicated in the report that I prepared, the Center for Disease Control of the CDC recently did an analysis of intimate partner violence. And in their report, the psychological effect was just as severe and serious as were physical effects of violence.
And what are the statistics, doctor, in our society of women who have been battered by men?
The research I've seen, it's anywhere from 1 to 3 to 1 to 4. So,
and what about for men, doctor?
Studies I saw was 1 out of 7 from the CDC.
And what about the seriousness of harm that an abuser may do to their spouse? Did you see any statistics relative to that?
I'm not sure of that question.
I'm sorry, doctor. And is, for the seriousness of harm that an abuser may cause their spouse, is it generally higher in men or women?
Well, obviously it's higher in violence from men to women.
Can you explain how the heightened sense of knowing the abuser and prior acts can come into play with a woman's perception of the threat?
Can you ask that again, please?
I absolutely can. Can you explain how there may be a heightened sense of knowing the abuser and how that may create a different lens that a battered woman sees through?
Well, let me answer it this way. It may not be your question. It's the perception of what's going on in her.
That's fine. I can ask
I'm going
it
to
again.
sustain it, and you've got to answer a question that's asked of the doctor. If you can.
I'll try.
No, I will. That was my fault and certainly a poor question. How does a woman's perception change if she knows her abuser?
Okay. Certainly, knowing what has happened before is a fairly strong predictor in the woman's mind of what's likely to happen again. So what has happened before, whether it be psychological or physical threats or violence, shapes the perception of what's likely to happen again. She might be wrong about that perception, by the way, but it's her perception based on her experience that causes her to respond in a particular way.
Do you feel that the battered woman syndrome is a theoretical concept?
Not anymore.
And why not?
Well, first of all, it's been recognized by all 50 states as a syndrome, that there's research to support it, and it's no longer a theoretical concept. It was at the beginning, but there's certainly mountains of evidence to support the syndrome itself as a real factor.
What are classic traits that you may see in the abuser?
Well, one usually sees in the abuser is a pattern of jealousy and possessiveness and ridicule, suspicion, and a sense of wanting to always be in control.
Does an individual have to be diagnosed with PTSD in order to meet the battered woman syndrome?
No, and that's an area that's under discussion and some controversy. There is a great deal of evidence to indicate that many women would meet the criteria for what we call post-traumatic stress disorder in the manual. But not all women who are battered and experience the syndrome meet that criteria. There's a number of criteria that you have to meet, and they generally don't meet all of them. The people that I evaluate, most of the women have met that criteria, but not all.
And what about an MMPI? Is there anything that you would see particularly on an MMPI test that would indicate the battered woman syndrome?
Would you explain what the MMPI is?
Yes, would you please? Doctor, can you explain what an MMPI test is?
This is a test called the Minnesota Multi-Basic Personality Inventory. It's a 567 question exam that we use kind of as a standard assessment of mental illness in our field. The MMPI has been around since the 1940s. It's been revised several times. There's a revised form that people use these days, and it basically is our kind of our blood test as to whether or not there's an underlying mental illness. In assessing individuals with the battered woman syndrome, you would look for perhaps the elevations on scales that are associated with mental illness or anxiety or depression, but you don't always see those elevations on a particular test.
And Doctor, you explained the cycle of the tension building, the psychological or physical act, and then the apology stage. How many cycles does one need in order to fit the battered woman syndrome?
We normally like to see 2 cycles. one cycle would not be sufficient to establish a pattern.
Right. But after 2 cycles, you would say that's sufficient for a battered woman syndrome?
Yes.
Thank you, Anna. I have no further questions.
Morning.
Just a few questions. So I am correct that in this particular matter, you did not review any documentation or anything with regard specifically to Ms. McKernan, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you did not evaluate her.
I did not.
So you are not here to offer any opinion as to whether or not she may or may not suffer from battered woman syndrome, correct?
That's correct.
Now, you had acknowledged that this battered woman syndrome was first coined, I believe, in the 80s?
1984.
1984. So fair to say we are looking at 84, just about 30 years that this syndrome has existed in discussions in your field.
Yeah.
And even after all of that period of time, while not theoretical, you would agree with me it is still not substantiated sufficiently to become a diagnosis in the DSM. Are we up to 4 or 5 now?
We're at 5.
DSM-5.
That's correct.
And I also believe it was your testimony here today that this syndrome, while referred to as battered women's syndrome, can also affect men.
That's correct.
So it is not limited to women.
It wouldn't be called the battered woman syndrome for men.
Okay. Battered spouse?
Battered spouse, or the more recent term is intimate partner syndrome,
Okay.
or intimate partner violence.
And I believe you had indicated that some of your statistics show from the CDC that 1 out of 3 women may have suffered some form of abuse in their life.
That's correct.
And would you agree with me that the battered woman syndrome does not affect every woman who may have suffered some abuse?
Yes.
And in fact, I believe you testified you have now been practicing for 30 plus years? Yes.
In this field?
Yes.
Now we have to do math.
I
I started in 1980.
Okay.
So.
And I believe you said in that entire period of time, you personally have only had up to approximately 30 individuals that you have worked with that had battered woman syndrome.
Yes. Can I amend that?
Well, they can get you corrected. Is that?
I would stay with that. Yes.
Okay. So you would agree with me that this is not a syndrome that affects every individual that may suffer some form of abuse in a relationship.
That's correct.
Also, am I correct, sir, that one of the factors that you may look at with regard to battered woman syndrome is the individual's personality traits, such as whether they're submissive or dominant? Is that correct?
Yes.
And I believe you use that term, submissive.
Yes.
And I believe you also stated that one of the things that you would look for is whether or not they suffered some form of depression.
Yes.
Ma'am, over here. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Doctor, do you recall the question that BWS is not necessarily a diagnosis under DSM-5 for PTSD?
That's correct.
Does that make battered woman syndrome any less real?
No.
Okay. And not every woman who has been abused suffers battered woman syndrome.
That's correct.
Okay. But a woman who has experienced the 2 cycles of the tension building, the psychological or physical act, and then the apology stage would fit the criteria for battered woman syndrome.
I'm checking, Your Honor. Oh, that's tough.
Yes.
then I also think that you wanted to amend your answer relative to the 30 evaluations. How would you like to amend, Doctor?
Because
Your Honor.
in my role as a court psychologist over a 19-year period, we evaluated hundreds and hundreds of individuals, thousands. And in that context, there were certainly many people that were abused, but we didn't pursue it with the notion of a battered woman syndrome because most of them were just sentencing recommendations that we made.
Thank you. And can a dominant woman suffer battered woman syndrome?
And a what?
Dominant woman suffer battered woman syndrome?
Yes.
Can a woman who does not show any clinical signs of depression suffer from battered woman syndrome?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor. Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
You may. Ladies and gentlemen, I know we've only been at this a short time. We're just going to take a quick bathroom break. Literally a quick bathroom break. I'm going to ask that you, I'll have the bailiff take you out. As soon as, if you would like to relieve yourself, you may, or get something to drink, hopefully in about 5 minutes.